Like many of you, I was very moved by the life of Thich Nhat Han. And this past weekend, when he passed, was spending the weekend really watching the ceremonies at his root temple in Vietnam, also at Plum Village in France, and at Deer Park Monastery here in Southern California. And so, of course, I was motivated to look at his chart. And I wanted to share that with you because I think it's a great demonstration of many things. I think one of the things that it really demonstrates powerfully is the power of planets that may be considered debilitated, but in his case, which are Neecha Bhanga. It's interesting to look at his chart. It surprised me when I first saw it, but then as I looked more deeply at it, I'm just really touched by this chart, and I can see where this great man of peace comes from. So just to start, he's got a very strong Mars in Aries in the 5th house, and a very strong Mercury in Libra in the 11th house. And there are many people who are well known even today who have Mercury in the 11th house, and you can see that they have great skills in communication. They're great speakers, they're great communicators. Thich Nhat Han was also a great writer, a very prolific writer. It's interesting that he was born with Sagittarius rising. You'll see a lot of spiritual teachers have some strong Sagittarius in their chart. And he did have the sun in the 10th house, which is also something we may see with someone who's a leader or somebody who is up in front of people, speaking, presenting, somebody who is visible, right? Because this means the sun he was born at 1:30 p.m., 13:30. And so he was born when the sun was directly above, right? And so he was born when the sun was at the high point. Sun is self. So the self is lifted up and seen and made visible. It makes a person visible in their work. What's interesting is that Venus, when it's in Virgo, is considered debilitated. Moon, when it's in Scorpio, is considered debilitated. And this is a moon in the 12th house plus with Saturn. So it would be, unless we really look at this, it could be considered not necessarily strong, although of course we know he had a very strong mind. And then Jupiter is in Capricorn, and Jupiter is also considered, we call it debilitated, but I think that's an unfair word perhaps. But Jupiter is not in its strongest place in Capricorn, and the whole world has experienced what it's like to have Jupiter in Capricorn, because we had Jupiter in Capricorn most of 2020, and because of his retrograde motion, again, a lot of 2021. So 3 planets that are said to be debilitated, but all of them are Neecha Bhanga in varying degrees. The moon is in Scorpio. The ruler of Scorpio is Mars. Mars is aspecting that moon from a very strong place in Aries. So got a very strong ruler of his moon aspecting the moon. One of the rules that cancels out the debilitation makes it Neecha Bhanga. Neecha Bhanga means the debilitation or that weakness is canceled, but the weakness never goes fully away. And this is what's so beautiful about these planets when you have Neecha Bhanga planet, is what you'll see, or at least what I've seen over and over again, is that it's like a person has had to have the experience of not always understanding or not always having a natural strength in this area of their life. They may even have some, when it's the moon in Scorpio, they may even have some emotional wounding or injury or lack of nurturance from the mother for whatever reason when they're young, or lack of nurturance. Maybe it's not the mother's fault. I always say this is the perception of the person, but the mother may have been away. It may have been another person who was responsible for the primary caretaking, but there was something of a perhaps lack of nurturance. So the person emotionally can not feel fully loved or held, nourished, nurtured, right? But when it's Neecha Bhanga, it's a person who then wants to go out and understand that and go out for themselves and do what they need to do to give themselves that self-nurturance. The moon is mind, the moon is manas. The moon relates to our mental and our emotional nature, our thinking, our feeling, our willing, reacting. And so moon is not just the emotional body, moon is mind. And look, this is a person who really studied the mind, who really, really spoke of the mind, who spent his life cultivating his own mind and helping others cultivate theirs. So the beautiful thing about moon also, when it's in the 12th house, it's a moksha house, and it's also a house of wanting to help others. So it's a moksha house, a house of self-realization, a house of freedom through spiritual liberation, through that self-realization. 12th house is also a house of ashrams, monasteries, convents. places of retreat. We could say it's a place of confinement. It's a house that relates to places of confinement. So it can also relate to hospitals, hospices, prisons, but of course, in this case, it relates to monastery. He went into a monastery when he was an ashram, a Buddhist monastery, when he was only 16 years old and lived his whole life there. So he was able to go into a monastery, this moon in the 12th house, a Neecha Bhanga moon, study the mind, learn how to cultivate the mind, and learn how to gain freedom through these cultivations of mindfulness. It's amazing. And Saturn on the moon too can cause a shadow to the mind. So another reason to want to study and learn about how to cultivate the mind. And then once awakened, one has the compassion to help others. Very, very beautiful. Jupiter is in Capricorn, aspected by Saturn. It's a partial aspect, but it is still there. So as with Mars aspecting the moon, he's got Saturn aspecting the Jupiter and canceling out that debilitation. Thankfully, because Jupiter is the ruler of his rising sign. Rising sign is Lagna in Sanskrit. So Jupiter is the Lagna Lord. And so for his physical health, he lived to be 95. And though I know he's been sick for a number of years, he still lived to be 95. So that Neecha Bhanga and Jupiter, Neecha Bhanga Lagna Lord, helped to give strength to his physical body. And then just one last thing, because we could talk about this, but Mercury is in Libra. Libra is ruled by Venus. Venus is in Virgo. Virgo is ruled by Mercury. And the thigh bone's connected to the knee bone. These two planets are connected in what's called a Parivartana Yoga. So they're in an interchange. Mercury is in Venus's sign and Venus is in Mercury's sign. Thankfully, because otherwise that Venus would be debilitated. And a debilitated Venus can be, as with the moon and with Jupiter, can be problematic. So Mercury being in Libra, of course, gave him the great gift of insight and intellect and communication and writing and teaching, of course, and it's in the 11th house, so that expands it all. But the Mercury also helps to cancel the debilitation of his Venus, also with the sun in the 10th house. In this case, you see him as a great teacher of compassion. Venus is a planet of love and beauty, harmony, and relationships. And so again, Neecha Bhanga Venus, he becomes a teacher, visible, seen in the world, even a leader of compassion. And one of the beautiful things that was shared on the weekend in the celebrations of his life was the beautiful chant that he led, and it's on YouTube, and it's the Namo Avalokiteshvara, the chant to the divine power of compassion, divine force of compassion. This was a great, great leader of mindfulness, of compassion, of peace. And you can see in him such humility. He was such a powerful man. He changed so many lives. He caused great ripples throughout the world. He spoke up against the Vietnam War, and there were many, many great powers invested in that war. He went into exile because he spoke up about it. He spoke up gently and peacefully and had to go into exile. And the exile brought him to France, brought him to America, brought him to the world. And so that his word was able to expand across the world. So his teachings have blessed very, very many, and yet with so much humility. And the Neecha Bhanga planets give that. They give a kind of, somebody may have suffered in some way, but then is determined to learn how to overcome that so that they can get free of it, and then to help others get free as well. Because they had to learn it, they've got enough objectivity to then be able to be teachers of others, which is why Neecha Bhanga is said to sometimes even cause the planet to be greater than exaltation itself. If you're born with an exalted planet, exalted sun, you may have great self-esteem and self-confidence, but you don't know where it came from. You were born with it, right? So you maybe can't really tell others how they can get it too. Neecha Bhanga means you've had to study it, you've had to learn it, you've had to cultivate it. And now you have the objectivity, the clarity to categorize it. And you know then what it was that got you there. And that helps you teach others. And so again, you can see what a beautiful, beautiful human being. We are so, so lucky to have his presence, to have his aliveness here. And hopefully he will continue to live on eternally through all of us, in our hearts for sure, but hopefully in our actions too. And to that peace and compassion in you. Thank you.